This presentation's purpose is to get you more familiar with the Gateway Guides program. Gateway Guides is an additional layer of service through the Wellness Center. We're specifically designed to support our freshmen. What we do is we help with skills enhancement and strength identification through one-on-one meetings with our guides. We help you identify personal strengths, areas of wellness that might need to be attended to, and how to identify ways to solve problems that you can use now and throughout your whole college career. It's not therapy, and we're not counselors in this setting. It's meetings, and we're guides. It's also a free service for you as a freshman. As we go through this presentation, we'll hopefully give you a better understanding of how we can support you and what we have to offer. During the presentation, there'll be several areas where I will pause and ask some questions for your reflection. Have something handy so that you can take notes to complete your assignment paired with this presentation. So the first thing that we want to talk about is normalizing what you might be feeling. The adjustment to college isn't easy. The 2008 American College Health Association's national survey reported that 4.2% of college students felt homesickness affected their academic performance. 95% of first-year students reported feelings of homesickness when placed in new environments, and 20% experienced moderate to severe levels of homesickness. As you notice, homesickness is pretty prevalent. If you're experiencing something like this, know that it's normal. The bottom statistic there, 7% of students have experienced severe depressive or anxious symptoms. So if you are experiencing that, that's something normal too. We're going to teach you how to access support for both of those. This next slide talks about some thought patterns that can be impacting how you're adjusting to campus. On the left, you'll see common thoughts that freshmen have. So you'll notice on the left things like, I want to go home, I want to be with my family, or I don't belong here. If you give these thoughts enough time and chew on them repeatedly enough without taking any action, they can have the effects on the right. Some of those can even be physical effects. Nausea, headaches, and they can impact your sleep and your eating. So what can you do when you experience new and different stressors caused by starting college? The following are areas that we think are really important to look at. We need to attend to wellness. We need to identify strengths and weaknesses. We might need to build in some coping strategies. And we need to work through stressful situations. We're going to look at each of these areas in this presentation. So the first question is, what is wellness? How might you define wellness? Take a minute and ask yourself, what do you think wellness is? In Gateway Guides, we include all of the following as areas of wellness: emotional, occupational, intellectual, environmental, spiritual, physical, and social. These can mean different things to different people, and we have some definitions that might be helpful for you. In this slide, you can look at each area of wellness and note what it means for us. See if you relate to one more than the other, or if you might have anything to add. So your first reflective question: pause and tell us which part of wellness may come easiest to you. Take a look at the definitions on the slide prior and see which one may come easiest to you. This might be something that you don't really have to attend to much anymore because it's become such a habit in your life. Once you've identified the area of wellness that comes easiest to you, take a moment to identify the area of wellness that might be hardest to maintain. We often see in classes that intellectual wellness is something that's being focused on pretty primarily right now as you've just started college. The next thing that we want to do is look at strengths and weaknesses. We all have things that we do well and things that are more challenging for us. Your next reflective activity is to get out a piece of paper and fold it in half. On one half, what we'd like you to do is write down strengths, at least 3. If you can come up with more, that's great. Think for a minute about how we identify our strengths. Sometimes these are things that we hear repeatedly about ourselves, positive feedback that we've gotten over and over. Sometimes it's a value that we really appreciate about ourselves. Sometimes it's something that we've utilized in the past that has really helped us to become successful. So strengths can be attributes or habits. Once you've identified at least 3 strengths, look on the other half of your sheet of paper and write down just 2 or 3 weaknesses or challenges that you might face. Once you've done this activity, take a moment to assess. Which one was easier for you to do? Identifying strengths or weaknesses? We often see that students have an easier time identifying their weaknesses or challenges. This is important to note. It's important to know both our strengths and our weaknesses because if we can look at the areas where we're really strong, then that might help us find new and creative strategies to attend to our weaknesses. The next thing that we'll talk about is coping strategies. A coping strategy is a thing a person uses to deal with a stressful situation. A strategy can be behaviors or thoughts that are used to overcome, deal with, or reduce stress. Coping strategies can be 4 different ways: positive or negative, active or passive. The point here is that we want to find a balance in the coping strategies that we use. Hopefully we have many more positive than negative. We wanted to give you a diagram of how active, passive, positive, and negative coping strategies interact with one another. So take a look at this diagram and notice that there can be both active and positive strategies listed in the first quadrant. These can be joining clubs to meet new people on campus if you're having trouble getting connected. It can be making a list of everything that you have to get done. It can even be going to office hours for one of your professors. There's also positive passive. Taking a break to do something you enjoy when things are just too overwhelming. It can be calling a friend that you know is always supportive. It can be taking a hot shower or a nap if you're just too tired to engage those active coping strategies. There are both negative, active, and passive though. Let's take a look at negative active. Negative active can be getting into a heated conversation, or it can be staying up all night to do homework. All-nighters just don't work. A negative passive coping strategy can be avoiding the problem altogether or using drugs or alcohol to not even think about the problem at hand. This just prolongs things and makes it even harder to engage those active coping strategies when you need to. Active coping strategies are also called approach strategies. An approach strategy or active coping strategy involves taking action or doing something that's going to directly impact or affect the stressful situation you find yourself in. What might be some active coping strategies that you've engaged in? It can be seeking support or resources, taking action that will change the situation, or using critical thinking to problem solve. Logistically, this can be making a list of all the things that you need to do. That in itself can reduce stress quite a bit. Passive coping strategies are also called avoidance strategies. These are behaviors or thought patterns that avoid directly dealing with a stressful situation. A passive coping strategy can be helpful, but if you avoid for too long, it may make it difficult to finally take action when you need to. What are some examples of some passive coping strategies? These can be things that are completely unrelated to the situation. Exercise, sleep, Netflix, putting aside the stressful feelings and focusing on other feelings. It can also be wishful thinking. Wishful thinking is an example of a passive coping strategy that's also negative. The positive aspect of a passive coping strategy is that they can be things that help you to feel good and rejuvenated so that you have the energy to enact an active or approach strategy. So your next reflective question, take a moment to think about whether or not you engage in active or passive coping strategies more often. And remember, neither one is better or worse. They both exist and they both have a place. But reflect back and think about which one you use more often. The next thing that we'd like to do is provide you with a pattern of problem solving that we've found really successful in Gateway Guides. It goes in order and it just has a few steps. The first is to try to understand what it is that's actually impacting you in a stressful situation. Sometimes when stress hits, we can become so overwhelmed that it feels like it's a ton of things all at once. Take a moment to really understand what it is that's problematic. The second is to normalize for yourself and have some compassion. Remember that everybody experiences stress. The third step is to assess the problem and then to think critically. This is where your approach strategies come in. These can be lists or it can be accessing resources. And then you prioritize what's important. Take that first step and see what you need to do. The next step is to break your plan into smaller steps, smaller and smaller and smaller until it feels doable. Next is to identify your strengths and resources. So once you've created this great list of all these steps, identify what it is about yourself that's going to make it doable and what resources you need to do it. And then the last is to get support if you need it. Sometimes we can't quite work through an issue that's so stressful all on our own. So now that we've equipped you with some ideas about wellness, we've had you reflect about different coping strategies and some strengths of your own, we want to put these into action. So you've got 4 videos to choose from. What we'd like you to do is choose a video, watch it in its entirety, and then work through the following questions based on that video. The first is to identify the areas of wellness for the student in the video that are being impacted. Remember that some of the videos may have more than one area of wellness that's being impacted. Try to be as thorough as possible and to note what you're observing in the video that lets you know that that area of wellness is being impacted. Remember that there's a slide earlier in the presentation that you can reference. The second is to discuss in a paragraph possible ways to resolve this issue. The slide that we were previously on will help you to have a pattern that you can work through that might help you to get a plan. So discuss different ways to resolve that issue for that student. The third, we want you to discuss specific strengths or coping strategies that might be helpful for the student in the video that you chose. What strengths do you observe about them? It could be something as small as their optimism, their sense of humor, or their ability to commit to things. If those are strengths that you observe, list them in detail. Then what coping strategies do you think might be helpful? Remember that there are 4 different types: positive, active, negative, and passive. And then lastly, identify any resources that you might think would be helpful for the student. These can include campus resources like academic advising, financial aid, Gateway Guides, mental health services through the Wellness Center, or the Rec Center. Identify as many as you think might be helpful for that student. Now that we've completed our presentation, we want to give you final information about Gateway Guides. If you feel like one-on-one meetings through Gateway Guides might be helpful for you, all you have to do is call the Wellness Center at the contact listed in the slide above. Call us, let us know that you're interested in Gateway Guides. We'll ask only a few questions and then we'll get in contact with you. And remember that what you're going through is normal and there are resources that can be helpful.